Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, question of the week: are there different types of introverts? Does the anti-vax debate have any leadership considerations? And a discussion with Joanne Lockwood. Joanne is an inclusion and belonging specialist, and although I often touch on these subjects, I only look at them from the narrow and perhaps less worthy perspective of introversion. So it would be great to hear Joanne's view on the business benefits of inclusion and belonging. What question would you like answered about introversion? Visit activateyourintrovert.co.uk and let me know. Partygate and bring your own booze continues to dominate the UK headlines this week, to which I'll just refer back to last week's article on introverts and the social gathering / work boundary debate, as it's one which many introverts struggle with and is perhaps the most relevant learning from it all. The other thing which continues to prey on people's minds, well, certainly the media's minds, is the vaccine or anti-vax debate. There was a very interesting article about the number of people who are and are not vaccinated, with some reasons for non-vaccinations, varying from libertarianism to distrust of modern medicine to conspiracy theories. And if you think I'm going to comment on those, sorry, you can stop hoping. But what I found interesting was how many of the vocal anti-vaxxers sway some of what the article called the vaccine hesitant. The existence of such a group, although not surprising, isn't something I'd considered. According to the article, this group don't have a political agenda, but for a broad range of reasons are undecided and doubtful. A high proportion of them opt not to be vaccinated because they are influenced. What's this got to do with you as a leader leading your business? You may well ask. It made me think about large teams and how they have pro, anti and hesitance when it comes to change. If you're trying to get a majority view, who do you focus your communications on? Many leaders focus on the anti-change group, or just keep chucking out their message without thinking, of course. Maybe we should consider the more change-hesitant group, which could well include the deeper thinking and reflective people. Like in an election, where parties nowadays tend to target swing voters because you'll never persuade the die-hard antis. Perhaps we should focus more communication on the change hesitant in our teams, so they go with your view rather than the anti. Sometimes the reasons for being hesitant may seem spurious, but easy to work on. Apparently, up to 10% of COVID vaccine hesitancy in the UK can be accounted for by needle phobia. To which I'll be honest and say, I hate needles, although I'm just a wimp, not phobic. Also in the news was Lake Superior State University of Michigan, where the phrases, "Wait, what?" "No worries," and "at the end of the day" have appeared on this year's list of banished terms. They also add to their annual list of trite and irritating expressions, "that being said, circle back," and "deep dive." Personally, I'd miss that one, but perhaps I'm the only introvert speaker who really can talk about deep diving. I mainly raise this all to remind us to consider the language we use when communicating with our teams. The purpose of your communication is to influence somebody else, so it certainly needs to be in a language that doesn't annoy them. And that led me on to another of my pet hates, and you'll shortly work out the reason why I have this particular hate. It's WhatsApp and LinkedIn voice messages. But my stated reason is that we should all communicate in the way the other person prefers. Speaking to WhatsApp or LinkedIn rather than typing is normally done to save time of the person sending the message, and of course it normally takes longer to listen to. But according to The Guardian this week, and here comes the interesting bit, the giveaway to your age is how you use your phone. If you voicemail, you're a boomer. If you send a voice note, that'll be those WhatsApp recordings, you're a millennial or even Gen Z. But as I said, the serious point here, if you're going to communicate with somebody, It's an attempt to influence, so do it in the way that suits the other person. And that also includes thinking about introversion. It could well be time now then to move on and talk about inclusion and belonging with this week's subject expert, Joanne Lockwood. Hi Joe.
Hi John, good to be here.
We're going to talk a lot about inclusion, belonging, and some amazing insights that you have into the subject. Just before we get into that, are you an introvert, an extrovert, and possibly more importantly, what does that mean to you?
People might consider me to be an extrovert. I think my inner person is inherently introvert. I get energy from me. My natural state is comfortable being alone, comfortable refreshing, comfortable recharging on my own. I can be life and soul of the party. I can be outgoing, but I don't really confuse being outgoing with introvert and extrovert. So I would definitely consider myself an introvert who is confident.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Joe. And I think there's a couple of points in that. Number one, an introvert who is confident, absolutely. But also, one thing that many people get stuck with is the idea that you just put out there, an introvert who is outgoing. So that's marvelous. Thank you. So inclusion and belonging. How did you get into that, and what would you say the big lessons and issues are?
The big challenge I had was it was a second career at the age of 52, a complete U-turn. I ran an IT company for the best part of 30 years, since the late 90s. I also ran my life as a man. So at the age of about 52, 2017, 5 years ago, I gender transitioned and changed my career completely. At the time, my motivation was to change the world for people like me, recognizing that trans people are often misunderstood. There's a lot of negative press. My mission, if you like, when I first transitioned was to become a trans inclusion specialist. And I soon realized that it wasn't all about me. There was a lot of injustice in the world, a lot of opportunity to create equitable spaces in employment in the world where everyone can thrive. And because I'm part of everyone, if everyone succeeds, I can succeed. So that's kind of how it came about, an evolution of that mission.
So what do you see as the big one or two issues when you think about inclusion and belonging? And I presume we're talking in the work setting mainly.
One of the things we talk about often in the space I'm in is around privilege and lived experience and the lens through which you see the world. And when you don't have to think about something, it doesn't affect you. And it's often hard to create empathy or compassion for people who are different to yourself, to understand their challenges. We all suffer from affinity bias. We suffer from a number of other biases. And it's often that people who don't fall into your in-group, your affinity, they're seen as less capable, less worthy, less able. And so when we think about in terms of recruitment, we tend to hire on our own image. We tend to hire people who have a demonstrable track record, have done the job before. And so if you're trying to break in, you're trying to be seen as worthy, it's very hard to prove yourself. And I discovered that at the age of 52. I had zero track record, lots of motivation, lots of passion, lots of capability. But it was really hard to get opportunity because people just looked at my experience. And that's the biggest challenge, when we think about inclusion belonging, it's recognizing privilege, it's recognizing lived experience, and it's creating genuine opportunities for all people, creating environments where they feel safe and they can thrive.
And I love the phrases that jumps out there. It's hard to be compassionate with people that are different.
It's not hard. It's just something that you have to work on. And we talk about things like emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence. So it's about being in control of your emotions, recognizing people have different emotional needs, adapting your leadership or communication style in order to be able to work with people who are not the same as you, being comfortable in culturally diverse situations. So whether that's the culture of ethnicity, faith, or race, or even the culture of disability, culture of deafness, culture of blindness, culture of introvertness and extrovertness, just understanding the language that people use to describe themselves and be able to recognize people's needs. So cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, I would say by focusing on that, seeking out knowledge, having the drive, having a strategy, being able to have conversations with people is the route. And I know that the challenge is that not everybody is culturally competent or feels comfortable having those conversations.
Who would you suggest to somebody who wanted to become more culturally competent?
I always say to people, is one, you've got to be interested in it. You've got to have I want to become more competent. Then it's about where do you get the knowledge? We live in a world of thousands of TV channels, millions of hours of YouTubes, documentary, Netflix, you name it. There's information out there. If you're keen to find out more, there are numerous sources where you go for research. Rather than burden a person to be your educator, you look at the contemporary issues today. We look at the news. There's a lot about anti-racism, a lot against violence against women and girls. We talk about environmental sustainability, plastics, etc., LGBT, trans issues. All of this is in the news. If you don't feel confident having conversations about this, then start with what's going on in the news. Do the research. Don't fall into confirmation bias. Don't just latch on to your view. Look for challenging opinions. Look to find out the alternative views of the world and build your own model. Be prepared to challenge yourself. Ask yourself why questions. Why do I think that? Why am I being told that? And be open to be challenged.
You raised the interesting one there, which I come across a lot. Bias. Step number one is to desire to change, desire to become more culturally competent. And I guess for many people, that starts to help them recognize their own bias. Would that be fair, or is there more you've got to do to recognize your bias?
You're right. You hear this term banded around wokeness, politically correctness. And if you think about the origins of the word woke, it's becoming awoken to cultural issues of the day. The opposite of woke is asleep. So you're asleep to the injustices that are going on in the world. So I would say rather than weaponizing and challenging the word woke, be proud to be woke. Be proud to be awake to social injustice. I would say that's the first step. Well, a couple of things. One is I've not actually realised where the phrase came from, and then suddenly you said that, it makes so much sense. And yeah, why would anyone not wish to be awake? But too many people weaponize it. But when you're weaponizing it, you're almost having your privilege challenged. You're almost saying, well, hang on a minute, as a straight white guy, you don't have to think about this. But now suddenly you've got these people trying to steal part of your pizza or part of your pie. But it's around recognizing there is infinite pizza, infinite pie. What we're trying to do is create more space. But biases, one of the mistakes we make is that we believe we can fix our biases. Biases are generally unconscious or subconscious. They occur without conscious thought. Our ancient brains are wired in such a way that we store memories, and we use those memories for rapid recall. And those memories often have stereotypes. They often have a perspective built into them. And when we bring these memories back, these patterns back into our brains, we tend to rely on these stored memories, the stereotypes. The first step really is recognizing that you have them, you have biases or blind spots, recognizing the fact you can't control them, that they're going to happen without your active thought, and then acknowledging ways you can mitigate. That's checks and balances, that's slowing your thinking, asking someone, this is what I think, what do you think? Getting more opinions into the room. We talk about diversity of thought. It's about having different views. The more views you have on a problem, the more likely you are to get a balanced viewpoint. Know when you are coming from a biased position, so you can not act on that bias, shall we say? I mean, there are tests on the internet, Harvard Implicit Association test, the IAT. There are ways of you can do various tests, and they'll show you that you maybe have a preference for people who are not disabled over people who are disabled. A preference for people who are Christian over people who are Muslim. I find those tests quite questionable because all they're really doing is explain to you what you could probably worked out yourself. Even women come out on these tests and prefer men as more capable leaders than women, just because that's how we're kind of gender programmed. Programmed in the background around that. It's a bit like I often say with extrovert, and I'll talk about an extrovert bias where we, particularly in a work environment, but we're programmed to believe that leaders are great, gregarious extroverts, and it's nonsense, but it's what's there. Yeah, and there's almost a shame about being quiet and introvert. It's almost like there's this extroverts are valuable, introverts are not, and that forces people who are introvert to step out of their comfort all the time, or feel like they're not achieving. And one of the key things about inclusion and belonging, you may hear this phrase, is bringing your whole self to work. being your authentic self. It's showing up as you, not showing up as the person you're expected to be or the person you've been told you have to be. And once you're authentic, once you are you, that's where the magic happens. Self-actualization, you feel that sense of belonging. You're belonging for who you are, not belonging because you're somebody else. And that's where all these layers of masking and covering can come off. And we can just be ourselves.
What's the business case, if I can put it like that, for being a more inclusive leader then, would you say?
Well, for me, the leadership tier in any organization is critical. They have the most influence over the culture, the success of the organization and of their team to succeed. So investing in the leadership is quite clear, and motivating your staff. They'll be on message, they'll be passionate, you'll get discretionary effort out of them, the error rates go down, the trust goes up. They're aligned with the passion and purpose of the organization, therefore everybody's pulling in the same direction. But if you're not making people feel valued, you're not creating spaces where people can speak up, you're not creating spaces where open and frank discussions can occur, then people start shutting down, they start doing the minimum. Then we look at retention rates, we look at absenteeism, we look at all these things, and you can, if you're simply looking at a business case, we can start to quantify these things in most organizations by looking at the difference between an engaged employee versus someone who's disengaged. And the disengaged person tends to pull down. No matter how engaged you are, you get pulled down by the disengaged person. That the rot can set in and it can become toxic.
Can I ask you for a tip for an introvert? What can an introvert do to feel more included?
Well, for me, my own experience in that was just accept that that's who I am. Don't be ashamed of it. Be proud of it. I'm a Capricorn. I'm an introvert. I don't need to apologize for that. You can be a high society, an outgoing person, and still be an introvert. I will hide myself in a toilet. I will go and sit quietly in a corner of a party. I will find my way of recharging.
Then go out and be outgoing again. Love it. And how about the other way around? What tip would you give to a leader?
I'd like to think this is kind of leadership 101. It's looking at your team.
Funny how often that's not done, though.
Yeah, looking at your team, recognizing the personalities, working out what the motivational factors are, how people like to communicate, and get to know their style. And then from there, you can then motivate them in a way that's unique to them. Being person-centric. One size does not fit all. So I think the leader's skill there, whether the person introvert, extrovert, is the leader is conscious about them and what makes them motivated. That's the real trick. How can they get the best out of you? Is it to push you into your panic zone, or is it to keep you just in the edge of stretch so that you know you can still succeed in your task?
Brilliant, thank you. And one last question for you then. I'm absolutely sure some of the listeners will be going, I want to get back in touch. I want to talk to Joanne. How can they do that?
Thanks, John. The easiest thing to do would be to find me on LinkedIn, Joe Lockwood, on LinkedIn, or my website, seechangehappen.co.uk. You can drop me a message on LinkedIn. You can drop me a message via my website, and I'd love to have a cup of coffee over Zoom with you.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant to talk.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
What would you like to know about introversion in business? This week's question comes from Alan. Alan would like to know, are there different types of introvert? If you've got a question about introversion you'd like answered on the show, whether you just want an answer or want to join me on the show and talk about it, go to activateyourintrovert.co.uk where there's a box for you to ask your question. Alan, the simple answer is yes. Of course there are. We can define the types of people in any way we want. Some methods are more useful and some easier to use. I used to joke that there are 3 types of people in the world. Those who like Marmite. Those who like Marmite with peanut butter, they've got really good taste. And those who have no taste at all. As a model, it's not much use, but it is a way of defining people. Being more serious, we could say people-focused introverts and task-focused introverts, and that gives us 2 different types of introvert. We could split our model into 16 types of people by using something like MBTI. Or we could talk about social introverts, considered by some as the classic type of introvert. Thinking introverts, perhaps they're more likely to be daydreamers. Anxious introverts, inhibited introverts? How far would we like to go? Of course, it all depends on what you want to do with the information, how much difference it will make to your approach, and how hard it is to get the information. There's many people who get confused by the simpler introvert versus extrovert definition, so adding more layers seems superfluous, which is why I talk more about introvert and extrovert, where for some tasks it may be more relevant to break down your team into much more tightly defined categories. So Alan, the answer is yes, and maybe. Maybe because it all depends on how many types of introvert you'll find useful. Every type of people categorization is a model for a purpose. The best model is always the simplest one that delivers on that purpose. What do you think? Feel free to jump onto Facebook and discuss your answers at the show's pages.
I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintroVert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.